a, a very condensed, informal session about basically how best to maximize your chances to get a security clearance. We're going to predominantly focus on what's called the SF-86, the Standard Form 86. This is the national security questionnaire that everyone at any level, at any agency of the federal government needs to fill out in order to be considered for a security clearance. It is a very lengthy form, so we're going to skip around to some of the sections that are generally the most likely to cause some problems. I'll go over some sort of basic aspects of it to start things out. And I'll say in particular, if a question comes up that you have, go right ahead and either jump in, raise your hand, whatever computer wise, or put a question in the chat and I'll take a look at it. I'm going to share my screen in a little bit to show you the SF-86 as we walk through it. So I've been handling security clearances now for 25 plus years. I hold a security clearance myself at the top secret SCI level. SCI stands for sensitive compartmented information. There are technically 3 levels of clearances: confidential, which I don't know if anybody actually still has in the government. I think it's probably about to go away within the next year or two. But then secret and top secret is generally what you hear about. Those are really the 2 levels. SCI is a compartment. It is an offshoot of generally top secret. Theoretically, not even theoretically, it can be off of secret in the sense that people with secret clearances can get access to other compartments, special access programs, but generally you'll hear TSSCI. The adjudicative guidelines that guide what factors are disqualifying potentially or mitigating, doesn't matter what the clearance level is. The higher your clearance level, the more likely you'll have to provide additional information, maybe go back in time further. But on paper, what is considered for adjudicative purposes are the same. The standards are the same. Now, I will tell you, on paper is not necessarily reality. And there are certain things that come into play at different agencies where there are different sensitivities. In order to get a security clearance, for one, and I don't know if it's going to apply to anybody here, you do have to be a U.S. citizen. There are certain exceptions, but for the most part, you will have to be a U.S. citizen. You will need a sponsor. So a lot of questions I get, well, what can I do now to prepare and get ready and get a clearance now so I can get ready to go once I graduate from Hopkins? Nothing in that sense. You need to be sponsored by either a contractor or a federal agency with having a conditional offer of acceptance or some other proposal. But what you can do, and what I absolutely recommend, is to Google SF-86. You'll find it on OPM, the Office of Personnel Management's website, and you can start filling that document out and thankfully save it to your computer, so that because it is so long, 132 pages, depending on which version you're looking at, a lot of times when you're asked to fill it out, you are given a short period of time in which to do it. And I will tell you, there are a lot of questions on there where you're going to have to do some research to figure out what your answers are going to be, even if it's something as simple as, what were your phone numbers back 8 years ago when you lived in some apartment, or who your neighbors were, or something of that effect, where you just have to go around and try and remember things. What countries did you visit? Where is my passport so I can look? And maybe your passport's not even stamped by some of those countries. If you went on a cruise in the Caribbean and you only stopped at countries for a day, at the Cayman Islands, at the French whatever, you're going to have to figure out and just remember what countries you went to and put them down on your form. So if you can start that form and then just supplement it, add to it, amend it later on, you will do yourself a great service in doing that. Now, to get a clearance, three things have to be met, three criteria. One, you have to fill out and sign the requisite paperwork, and that would include a non-disclosure secrecy agreement once you are granted. You have to have a background investigation. You have to be determined to be trustworthy by the US government, and you have to have a need to know to get access to classified information. So the most recent spillage with Texera, the Air National Guardsman in Massachusetts, the big question surrounding his case is going to be, especially from a damage assessment, what was his need to know? Why did he have access to classified information? Not whether or not he was trustworthy or filled out the documentation. So that's a separate issue, but that's at least something that will be taken into account. Need to know is just a relevancy determination. So background investigations, every agency will do something a little bit different. I will tell you nowadays that in order to work for the federal government, odds are you need to have a security clearance, especially in the intelligence community, military, or law enforcement. There are other agencies such as the Treasury Department or Agriculture where you might hear about filling out what's called an SF-85P, as in public trust. That is not a security clearance. We call it a security clearance light, but it is essentially a suitability determination that still goes to your trustworthiness, but it's not an actual clearance. You don't get access to classified information. It's a much shorter document. You can also Google it and pull it up offline. And it's about, I don't know, a 15, 20-page document. It covers a lot of the same information. It's clearly not as detailed as the SF-86, but that is a different type of process. I'm not going to cover due process issues with clearances in this conversation. I will talk a little bit about the adjudicative guidelines. That is also something I would recommend you Google. Just put in security clearance adjudicative guidelines. It will most likely pull up the document from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI, and you can look through the 13 adjudicative guidelines, A through M, to see what is potentially disqualifying and then what would be potentially mitigating. Security clearance information or disqualification is all about mitigation. If you can prove you didn't commit the crime you were accused of, fantastic. But most of the times it is talking about, yeah, there's some truth to what that issue might be. Let me give you some mitigating information as to why I should still be deemed trustworthy and have possession of sound judgment in order to be determined to have the privilege of holding a security clearance. And not everything that is negative is disqualifying for security clearances. You might have married or are dating a foreign national. That is, or have foreign national relatives who you've never met. Those are potentially disqualifying factors, which again would need to then just be mitigated. So let me pull up this document and we'll start to go through it. Give me a moment to find where I have it. All right, and we'll bring this on the screen. Okay, and let me just move this thing out of my way so I can go to it. Okay. All right, so there are 29 sections on this form. And I trust everybody can see right now the questionnaire for national security positions. Let me know if you can't, but it should be sharing. So the beginning of this form goes into very helpful information that I would definitely suggest you read through at some point so you get a decent sense. So there'll be a personal interview that you'll have by a background investigator, very likely a contractor, but again, depends on which agency you are applying for by way of a civil service position or as a contractor. Most clearances nowadays are conducted investigation-wise by DCSA, the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, if I got my acronym correct. This is the old DSS and the older DIS, Defense Investigative Service, Defense Security Service. OPM was the entity that took it away from DSS for a number of years, and now DCSA, the newer name, renamed agency, has taken it back. And they are the ones who generally do the background investigation now. Some agencies, particularly in the intelligence community and law enforcement, will also require you to sit for the administration of a polygraph examination. Separate aspect that is mostly for SCI positions. That is something I'm not going to talk about because I don't have the time for this session. But that is something that is very significant, and you have to, air quoting for the ones not watching me video wise, air quoting the notion of you have to pass it. There is really no such thing as a pass or fail in the sense of what a polygraph can determine. It does not know if you are lying or not. That is pop culture. What it knows is if you are physiologically reacting to the question, but it doesn't know why you might be physiologically reacting to the question. But you have to pass and fall within acceptable parameters in order to move forward. The key thing I'll just tell you about polygraphs is do not research it online. If you ever go through a polygraph, I prep people for polygraphs. That is not in any way training anyone how to beat the polygraph. The last thing you want to do is commit countermeasures. It's very hard to override that type of allegation. Basically, you just need to relax when you're doing the exam. But again, just not enough time to go into it. There are also different forms you may have to fill out beyond this one, depending on the agency, because every agency has its own internal forms that may differ, either go back further in time than this document or go beyond the document entirely with different questions. Now, as you see here, filling out this form subjects you to criminal penalties. If you lie or knowingly falsify or omit information intentionally, that could be prosecuted as a felony, up to 5 years imprisonment, $10,000 fine. That doesn't mean that if you forget to put down you went to the Bahamas in section 20 that you're going to be prosecuted. No, there are some people that are prosecuted for falsifying this form. It is rare. It is more likely you would be denied your security clearance or have it revoked, but it still is something you need to take into account, which is why you need to take this form very seriously. Same thing with giving information to the investigator is also something that would be viewed as giving a false statement verbally. And once you meet with the investigator, they will likely go through the entire form. And it's actually quite a waste of time, but this is the way the system is designed so far to verify the accuracy of each of what you have written into these sections. This form is your best chance in pushing forward information that will be helpful to you. So providing mitigating information into the form is far better to persuade the adjudicators that there is nothing of concern, rather than the background investigator having to ask you questions which then they may misunderstand or write down incorrectly, or not address at all, so that there are still questions that the adjudicators who you are not dealing with directly might have with respect to granting you the security clearance. So we'll go through a whole bunch of this. Again, best to just read through this as I skim through a bunch of sections very rapidly here. Most of the first few sections are pretty easy to fill out. You're going to know your name, first and last and middle, etc. You will see here, right? You are affirming, that you are subject to criminal penalties by filling this form out. you will see these, most of these, and this is a copy of the form that I have on my computer downloaded, but it is still a live interactive document where you can go and pick through, where you might have been born in this particular case, which for me would be the grand state of New York. Some of these documents still don't work particularly well. So for example, here, there are some places where if you put down an answer, it doesn't let you change it afterwards, because sometimes in this case, it's required here. So I have to answer it, but there'll be other places where if I did that and I mistakenly, as I have actually on my forms, put down Afghanistan, it wouldn't let me change the damn thing because it won't let me delete it. It can only let me modify it here. This question here on aliases, basically, this question now, excuse me, has some interesting ramifications because of what we just saw with the Air National Guardsmen. Most times people are thinking about this with, oh, okay, your name is Charles, so maybe you go by Charlie, maybe you go by Chuck. Those would be aliases or other names put down. What this doesn't yet say, and I'm pretty confident the next version of this document, which should come out within the next couple of years, is going to ask you about what screen names do you use anywhere that are publicly available. What's your Discord name? What's your Facebook username? What's your Twitter name? Your Instagram, whatever, Snapchat, TikTok. Now, I do not think the government is going to ever try and dive into what is private, what you've password protected, but anything that is publicly available will be fair game for the US government, as well, frankly, it should be, especially given what people post online nowadays. So keep in mind that technically this section would apply to usernames that you have in forums that, quite frankly, there is a balance between privacy interests and the public interest of having access to classified information. Maybe you're in a forum that really you don't want people to know about for whatever reason, because you're embarrassed about it. And, I'm sure everybody can think of various ones that might be either subjectively or objectively, but that is very likely to come up within your lifetime for sure. Passport information, citizenship information. If you are dual citizens, that is something that the form will ask you to indicate. As I said, you have to be a U.S. citizen generally to have a clearance, but if you are a naturalized U.S. citizen, there's nothing wrong with that. And tons of naturalized U.S. citizens, countless, have security clearances. But this section would envelop all of that type of information. This is, again, where you're going to have to look up some information. Having dual citizenship is not disqualifying. It is the exercise of dual citizenship. You might have become a dual citizen because of either you were born to parents who have another citizenship, or you were possibly born in that other country and then came over even as a U.S. citizen. So there's, again, nothing necessarily disqualifying about it, and certainly nothing wrong about it, but it is something that has to be revealed. Now, you will see throughout this form where the U.S. government uses bold and capitalized letters. That is a signal to you that that information being requested, that question is significant, and you need to pay careful attention. If it's in bold, that is different from when it is not. If it is in bold and capital, even more so. And usually you'll see the term ever, the word ever, in bold capitalization. So, exercise of dual citizenship, what would that mean? Did you vote in another country? Did you serve in the military in another country? Are you eligible for benefits or any type of financial payments from the other country? All of these are things that can still be mitigated and might have been out of your control, but are still things that could lead to a decision against you. Now, in the past, I used to have clients absolutely renounce their foreign citizenship. We do not do that any longer. The US government does not want you to do that any longer. All you have to say for something like this is no, and I am willing to renounce my foreign citizenship. Now, I want you to say that only if it's true. But I will tell you that if you say that, I have never seen in decades the government ever ask anyone to do it, because generally, frankly, it's better from a national security standpoint for you to have a foreign citizenship. You can imagine why. If you are a CIA case officer, that is of benefit. But even if you are asked later on and you go, you know what, I don't want to do it, fine, you just withdraw from the process. Nothing, that's not going to be a falsification by saying you're willing to renounce. Or if you want to be more comfortable, I'm willing to consider renouncing my foreign citizenship. But it would be better to say I am willing to renounce. That's all you have to do. Do not go to the embassy and give them your foreign passport, that passport. Do not tell them that. Why? Because they will know that it is likely because you are being processed for a US government security clearance, and you've actually enhanced the concern to the threat for national security, because maybe that country will now target you. Some countries, for example, India, if you were an Indian citizen and you become a US citizen, you automatically lose your Indian citizenship, but you are still eligible for a travel card or identity card, I forget the exact name of it, that basically allows you to travel more easily without a visa going over to India. Most countries don't care if you have dual citizenship, but there are some restrictions. Some you can't do anything about it. For example, some you need, if you are a citizen of that country, like Russia, like Israel, you need to have that country's passport to be able to go and travel into that country. That's fine. You want to use your US passport when you leave the United States and when you re-enter the United States. And as long as you fill out this section and tell them about the other country's passport, that generally will be fine. If you can avoid using the other country's passport, if it's not required, that would be preferable. But if it is required, the US government understands that, as long as they know that you are doing that, you are using it because of that reason, that's particularly fine. That will be fine. Where you have lived, again, looking back, 10 years. You'll see most of these sections are 7 years, but this one is particular 10 years. Now, it will depend on how old you are and how far back you have to go. Generally, you don't go back prior to 18 when you became the age of majority. But you'll see in this section and others, it's going to ask you for people's names to verify that you lived there, that you worked there. Now, there'll be another section, section 16, that asks for 3 references. You can't have the same people in different sections. So if your reference happened to be your best friend who was a neighbor or could verify you live somewhere, then you need to come up with someone else. You obviously also, for both this section and section 13, which is employment, you want to put down people who are going to say good things about you, not the landlord who hated you, if you can avoid that. Now, if you had a problem with the landlord, you can certainly put mitigating information into this system to say, what, and explain what that problem might have been. The government will understand, because most of us have always had problems at some point in time with your landlord. Now, if you see 136 pages total, but as you see in this section, it's assuming you lived in a lot of different places. This is all the same language in this form. So there's like 5-6 pages right there. That's just all the same. And maybe you only lived in one place for all your life. So that would be an easy thing to answer. Where you went to school. I am always shocked how many people lie that they actually completed a degree. I would not expect that of a Hopkins student. But believe me, if you have not finished your degree, do not claim that you received a diploma, because this is one of the areas where the US government actually will, what the old term of gumshoeing, will go to the school or contact them in a manner to verify that, in fact, you achieved whatever degree you claim to have achieved in this section. So yes or no will be verified here. Section 13, as I said, is employment. And it's a little confusing because it goes through all these different angles here of where you're going to go. Thankfully, it says where to go depending on which of these, and multiple may apply to you, where you would go. So maybe you were military, so you got to fill out these portions. Maybe you were also self-employed at some point, so you fill out those. Maybe you are unemployed as a student right now, even though this will be possible. I don't know if everybody's part-time, could be some full-time students, I suppose, here. Maybe you were unemployed, particularly during COVID, for a period of weeks or months. Not a problem. You just fill out this section here, and that will give you the ability to just indicate, hey, I was unemployed because I had been traveling in Europe for a period of time in between semesters, or I lost a job because of COVID and I was staying at home. Not going to be an issue. You'll have to have a verifier for that as well, which could be perhaps your accountant or your boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, could be someone else in your family, could be a friend, could be a roommate. Not an issue. Likelihood is those people will be spoken to. So again, keep in mind, you have flexibility there on who to choose to put down. So for example, supervisor, it does not say first level, second level. Maybe you didn't get along with your first level. Fine. Put your supervisor down here, or the owner of the company, because that would be a supervisor too, if that's someone who could speak to and verify the fact of what your employment situation was. You'll see in a bunch of questions like here, I don't know. That's an answer. If you don't know what the email advice, you haven't talked to that supervisor in 6 years. This question goes back, 10. So let's say you make it better. 9 years, you have no idea where that person is. You worked at a day camp during the summer, you just no clue. You just say, I don't know, or or maybe the company's out of business and you just say not applicable or something like that, because or unknown, whatever it might be. Now, in what gets a lot of people in trouble in this section has to do with, why did you leave the employment? And again, you're seeing all of this is very similar questions here. So the form is not as long as it looks. But why did you leave? Now, maybe it was, I returned back to school. Okay, not a problem. But maybe there was a problem. Now, I will tell you, the US government really does not care if you had a conflict of interest, if you had a personality conflict with your prior bosses and somehow you got fired, or you got fired because you kept falling asleep, or you showed up late at work. They're really not going to care. What they will care about is if you don't reveal that. Were you fired? Were you quit after being told you would be fired? Where did you leave because you had a conversation and they're like, I think it would be best, this isn't working out, you should go. You just need to provide that information. Now, one of the things, now I don't know if anybody is a lawyer. There may be one or two of you guys that are lawyers here, but I will tell you, and even for you, most of you who are non-lawyers, you do not want to, what we say, lawyerize this form. That means this form is very poorly worded. And there are a lot of words on this form, such as misconduct, that are not defined. I know what it means generally. I know what it means if I look it up in the dictionary, but it is not defined. And what you don't want to do is do contract interpretation to try and figure out a way how you can fall outside of what this is seeking. If this would raise a potential security concern, the government wants to know about it. Again, doesn't mean you can't mitigate the concern. But, if you walked away in a screaming match with your former employer and you went, "I quit," and they went, "You're fired," and in your mind, you think you quit, when the government goes and checks the records and it says ineligible for rehiring, fired, that's going to cause a problem. So you would best to say, as far as I know, I quit, but I don't know what the file says. I had a conflict with my boss and a difference of opinion, and it wasn't a good fit, and I left. Maybe they'll ask you more questions about that. But again, it's all about just giving the explanation. Same thing with more here: warned, reprimanded, suspended, disciplined. Sometimes this is not very clear as to what that actually might mean. A lot of times, really, what I'm going to tell you is with a lot of clearance issues, my answer is always going to be, it depends. And I'll need to have a more detailed conversation with you to drill down on the factual circumstances to decide how best to either to respond or enter in mitigating information to help push you over the edge in a good way for this favorable determination. All right. So you can see this is all section 13 here. So, and again, here it even says, that you've not previously listed. Has any of the following ever happened in the last 7 years? Boom, 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 boom. Section 14 is just your selective service for, registration. Only applies to men. Thankfully now, if you don't know your number, your selective service number, you can just go to the website and look it up. If you served in the military, you'll fill out section 15. I don't even know, I can't tell, of course, if you did or not. A lot of my students in my class have, so they'd fill this out, and obviously it's just the obvious information. What branch were you in? Did you have any issue? What was your discharge? Things like that. If you weren't in the military, you just skip down to the next section. Section 16 is what I told you about with your 3 primary references. I always prefer, if you know someone who holds or has previously held a security clearance, that would be a good thing to put down. The more of greater stature the person is, right? A federal judge is probably going to be more influential than the person who works at Walmart, not to knock Walmart employees. But you are looking to try and bolster, just like you would on your resume or a job reference, to give someone who would be looked upon as favorable as possible. But look, if you don't know anybody who had a clearance before and you don't know a federal judge, it's fine. You want to have someone who's known you for a long time and who obviously is going to speak incredibly well of you. Now, again, you get to decide who you put down here. So think long and hard about it. Your best friend might have been your college roommate, but you might have also smoked a lot of pot with them. And so maybe you want to consider not putting them down, because one of the questions that will be asked of your references, which will be taken from a script, will be what they know of your drug usage and alcohol usage. And the last thing you want is to have an inconsistent response that your friend, your reference, unknowingly or inadvertently provides. And I have seen it too many times where you, the applicant, you put down, yeah, I smoked pot, maybe lawfully in the state. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But I did it mostly on the weekends. And you downplayed how often. And then your friend is like, oh yeah, we got high, 3, 4, 5 times a week. Problem. That's a problem. So think about that. Now, in this section, you do want to tell that person that you have listed them as a reference, because the federal government, somebody probably in a suit, is going to come and interview them. And so you want to forewarn them about that. Depending on the agency, they may say it's for a background investigation or not, or they may reveal what agency or not, but they will say it is for a background investigation. Now, that doesn't mean I want you to go over stories and try and sync them or influence what they would say. No, we don't want that. That could present a problem as well. Section 17 is just with your marital relationship status. Now is all sorts of pretty much everything will fit within this particular section. And even if you're divorced, your ex is going to be communicated with. If you have a negative relationship with your former spouse, believe me, the U.S. government understands that may mean that negative information is going to be put into the system from your ex-spouse. 50+% people are divorced, so probably good chance the people doing your background investigation and adjudicating your clearance are divorced as well, and that will be taken into account. So don't worry about that. I have seen some really nasty information put into the process by ex-spouses and their lawyers, which was rare. I don't know why that happened, but I saw it, and we still got the person their security clearance. Section 18, and again, this is looking into lots of different relatives, lots of different marriages and stuff. Now, this is talking about if you reside with someone, not talking about a roommate. They're talking about a boyfriend, girlfriend who you live with, but you don't have a legal relationship with. So that would be put down as well. That's what they mean by cohabitant, which also could be a roommate, but not based on what this question is asking for. And it will go into, there will be some questions where you will ask a person, particularly your family members, like your parents, and your significant other cohabitant, if they are a foreigner, what their citizenship status is and things like that. So if your boyfriend, girlfriend is here illegally, or spouse, and believe me, I have had these cases, are here illegally, something to consider if you are going for a security clearance. There are steps to work around it and to mitigate it, but not a good first introduction to the national security environment to have folks around you who are here illegally, whether you know it or not. Relatives in Section 18. This lists everyone who they're asking about. So it's not asking about grandparents, it's not asking about aunts and uncles, it's not asking about cousins. Excuse me. And this could change. For example, I'm divorced. I used to have a father-in-law and mother-in-law. I do not any longer as a matter of law because I am divorced. They're still around. Or maybe I didn't have a stepbrother or stepsister or a stepmother because my dad hadn't remarried after my mom passed away, but now he is. So now new people were introduced from the last time I submitted my own SF-86. And you can see these are drop-down menus for you to fill out on every one of these people who exist in your life. Now, that could create some problems. Maybe they have a criminal record. Maybe they are foreign nationals. I've even had it where they were convicted of terrorist activities, and that became a problem. But again, it depends on whether or not you can mitigate that information, and that's something we would need to discuss. If they're deceased, that's great mitigation. Sorry that that's the case, but that would be, frankly, great mitigation. But I wouldn't recommend you kill them. Just, let them die on their own, as it may be, because killing them would be a problem in another section on this form. Section 19 is where a lot of problems happen or complications. That deals with foreign national contacts, which for those of us who are in DC, and probably most of you who are in Hopkins for the programs where you want to go in the federal government, you probably have a good number of foreign national contacts. You can see, oh my God, Section 18 keeps going on and on and on and on, because most people have a lot of family members. So now Section 19 is one of the few sections where there is some aspects of definitions as to what constitutes a foreign national. Any person who is not, come on, not highlighting, who is not a citizen or national of the United States. That means if you know someone who is a dual US citizen and Chinese, they do not get listed in Section 19 because they are a citizen of the US. National means there's a very narrow set of, under the Immigration Nationality Act, if they're like from Guam or Micronesia or stuff like that. But so if they are a dual citizen, I'll say this again, you do not put them down on this form. Do not complicate it. Also, do not guess as to whether or not someone is a foreign national or not. The rest of this, now I'll also say, depending on the agency you apply to, you may have to actually put down dual citizens. If you want to work in the intelligence community, very often all of those agencies will ask you separately, either on this form specifically, because you're instructed directly, or on a supplemental form to list dual nationals. But if this form itself, no. Now, the problem is this here, none of it is defined. Do you have, or have you had, within the last, come on, where did it just go? My form just disappeared. Oh, stand by. Something just happened. Where did it go? All right, sorry, technical difficulties. Let me share it again and come back to what the heck just happened with it. There we go. All right. Last 7 years. So, for example, if you had a foreign boyfriend, girlfriend 6 years ago, you split up, you haven't spoken to them since, you hate their guts, you will never, ever talk to them again. Still, they get listed because it's within the last 7 years that you had a close and or continuing contact. Close, continuing, not defined. What does it mean? It means what it means. It means what it would mean by way of dictionary definition. That you know, certainly someone you dated for sure, but someone who, you know, you saw and interacted with regularly would be continuing. But it is not and. Again, a lot of people, including senior government officials, who think this question says close and continuing contact. It does not. So it could be that you don't particularly like this person, but because of work, you have continuing contact with a foreign national all the time. You have to put them down. With whom you or your spouse or legally recognized civil union, domestic partner, or cohabitant are bound by, and I'll get to this in a second. So it's not just you, it's these other individuals too. So you got to go talk to your spouse or your boyfriend, girlfriend who lives with you to see if they have anyone who fits the definition of Section 19. Again, these terms not defined: affection, influence, common interests, and or obligation. You can basically fit anything within those categories. So the good chance is they're going to be put down on this form. But again, it depends. Now, this is where there's a lot of I don't know answers. For this section, you do not want to go talk to the foreign national to ask them, where do you work? What's your address? Are you an intelligence officer in your foreign country? No. You only put down what you know, and be careful with how you obtain that information. For example, I'm friends with a lot of foreign nationals on Facebook. I can go to their Facebook page and see possibly what their birthday is, where they work, where they were born, because they might have entered it into the system. They don't know that I'm looking at their Facebook page. But if you go to their LinkedIn page, they may be notified that you looked at their LinkedIn page. So don't do that unless you know, because you have a professional account, that they're not looking at it. You know, maybe you can go ask someone who's a friend who's not a foreign national about the other person. If that's the case, fine. But otherwise, just say, I don't know the date of birth. I don't know the place of birth. I don't know their current address, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this would be, describe the contact, either no, I don't know, but you could say, I'm not aware that they have any relationship with, or let's say they do. A lot of foreigners do work for their foreign government, but it's because it's required, because it's a state entity. If they're a teacher in their country, they work for the foreign government. But so you can say, they're just a teacher and they teach elementary school, whatever it might be. And when you get to about, when the last date of contact, this is where you can put mitigation information into it. Now, if it doesn't fit within this section, this little bit of space, you can put a supplemental page for each of these contacts. And you may have far more than what the form goes up to, which I think is like 6 or 7. So you might have to add a whole number of people. But this is where you say, hey, I'm Facebook friends with them, and I only talk to them a few times a year, and it's usually just to exchange pleasantries. They have never asked me anything suspicious. They have never, they're not aware to my knowledge where I work or that I'm being processed for a security clearance. And if you are willing to say, and I am willing to sever contact with them if requested by the US government. Again, I've never seen the US government ever ask for that, but that is great mitigation to put down into it. Now, Section 19 will also potentially apply to your family members who are foreign nationals who don't fit into Section 18. So that foreign cousin who's down in Brazil, who you're really close to, they would be listed into Section 19. Section 20 is all sorts of foreign activities. I'm going to skip through it really quickly due to time, but this will be, for example, have you ever had a foreign bank account? I lived in England in 1988 as a study abroad program. I had a bank account. When I left England in April of 1988, I closed that bank account. I still have to put down, I don't understand why, to be honest, that I had a foreign bank account that I closed 35 years ago. Actually, 35 years ago this month, right now, probably right about right now, actually. So again, you need to look at the ever. This talks about stocks, things like that. They're not looking for if you have mutual funds and within the mutual funds, there's foreign stocks. No, they're looking for, are you invested in a foreign company overseas? Do you own a company? I had a guy, excuse me, who owned 50% of a brewery in Canada. That was actually a security clearance issue that we mitigated because it was a brewery in Canada. Give me a break. Now, foreign national contacts, foreign contacts or business contacts, it will matter what the country is. Clearly, if it's a country that's adverse to our interests, the PRC, Russia, Syria, North Korea, Cuba, Iran, yeah, those are going to be countries that are going to be looked at more seriously if you have family members there, etc., if you've traveled there, but not necessarily only adversaries. Israel, Taiwan, South Korea, South Korean presidents with the president of our country right now. Those are all countries. France, that conduct economic espionage and actual espionage against our country, like Israel does. So those are all going to be issues. And again, potentially disqualifying, not definitely disqualifying. We would just need to mitigate. Now, these are also where your spouse or other partners have to be asked these questions as well. But the one in this section, or the two parts that really become at issue are, and for some of you, especially if you're military or have traveled a lot, have you gone to conferences, things like that? Yeah, and that's again where you're going to have to really strain to think, have you done it? Because maybe some of you have done it a lot. That's why you should fill out the form now and just save it. For those of you who are older like me, if you had an au pair, financial support to a foreign national, if it was through the au pair systems like Au Pair on America and things like that, or in America, whatever it is, if it's a company That's not what this question is looking for, because you're actually paying the American company that brings in the foreign national. But if you have a nanny, perhaps, and you're directly paying someone who's a foreign national, or as some Supreme Court nominees have learned, or Attorney General nominees, you're paying someone who's illegal, who's your gardener, or elsewhere, yeah, could be an issue. Now, again, not asking you to speculate, and I don't go and ask my gardeners who don't speak English, most of them, whether or not they are foreign nationals or not. Yeah, Zoe Baird, absolutely. I bet most of our students here have no recollection of Zoe Baird, but I remember Zoe from 30 years ago. 20B6. Last 7 years, you or a member, here's where it's defined, immediate family, not just spouse. Now we got parents. Now we got siblings. Now we got children, if any of you are older and have adult children. This is contact with foreign government officials. Now, they're not talking about you're going through border crossings and you're dealing with immigration and visa, things like that. Not talking about that. I had to go to the Chinese embassy to get my daughter a visa when she went in high school. Not talking about that. But interactions with any foreign government officials, and this is not like Section 19 where it's close and or continuing contact. This is any contact. Now, when Jared Kushner was going through a lot of security clearance problems and it became public, which it shouldn't have, one of the questions, as well as with actually a better example, would be our former attorney general during Sessions, who had been a senator during the Trump administration. He got into partial trouble for not saying he had met with Ambassador Kislyak, the Russian ambassador to the United States. And his response was, well, I did it as part of my official government business. And I didn't have to put it as a U.S. senator. Well, this question has no exception for that whatsoever. Now, maybe he was told by the FBI, which did his background investigation, not to list something like that because that would be ridiculous, but not within here. And I remember when I would do a lot of news discussions that I'd be on with someone who had been in the government for years, and they're like, oh, I was in the Pentagon and I saw this foreign attaché, and I said, hey, Javier, how you doing? I didn't put down that contact. It was 2 minutes. Well, question requires it. Even though obviously the government wouldn't care about something like that, but the question does require it. And this could be a problem for you because of your relatives. So just something to keep in mind. Then this section is where you also talk about where you went foreign travel. And it's basically, if you had any issues there. All right, I'm going to jump real quick. Section 21 is dealing with your mental health. Look, OCD, ADD, ADHD, government's not concerned about it. And frankly, even if you have something more serious, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, as long as you're being properly treated and you're managing it, you can get a security clearance. Absolutely. And this is a section, particularly because of military and wartime service as a civilian or military, that they want you to reveal PTSD, things like that. It will not be used against you. Being diagnosed with a mental health problem or disorder is probably the better word, is not by and of itself, as it says, not a reason to revoke or deny. It all depends on what are you doing about it. Section 22 deals with criminal activity. Very important to look through this very closely, because I have so many clients who amazingly forgot that they were arrested. Now, this section deals with last 7 years, but part of the section also deals with ever. So if you have ever been charged with a felony, which often, I would say often happens and then very often gets dropped down to a misdemeanor, you still have to list it for the rest of your life, or anything involving alcohol or drugs. So like a DUI is always going to follow you. Doesn't mean it's going to disqualify you. Oh my God, there are tons of people who have security clearances who frankly are alcoholics. which is not a good thing, but still can be maintained. Section 23 deals with drug use. Let me just make it really clear. I don't care if it's legal to use marijuana in where you're living, which includes where I am in Maryland, or the District of Columbia, our nation's capital, where you could actually use mushrooms legally. It is illegal under federal law. We are not quite there yet. So if you are using any type of drug listed here, stop it. Stop it now. And you will be able to survive for your clearance. That includes illegal steroids use. This is not dealing with prescription medication. Now, it does deal with the misuse of prescription medication. So for those of you as students, don't be taking your roommate's ADD medication to help you study. That is illegal, and you will have to list that on your form here. Now, the government knows all about that happens all the time. So if you did it 3 years ago and you didn't know you weren't supposed to do it, and you didn't know that the federal government doesn't want you to use marijuana, which you did legally in Colorado a bunch of years ago, don't worry about it, as long as you're not using it now and let enough time go by. Section 24 deals with alcohol, very similar questions to drug use. For the most part, not a lot of your alcohol use will be captured in this. It's really if you've ever had any serious problems with your alcohol use. Section 25 just deals with your prior background investigations and your prior clearances. Again, if you don't know what agency was investigating you, which is often the case with contractors, or you don't know if it was granted, that's why it says, I don't know. But your old SF-86s will always be looked at, or should be. So the ones I filled out 25 years ago, I'm not sure how much they're going to really pay attention to it now, but they're somewhere in the system. So always save this document. Print out a hard copy, even though it's 136 pages long, and save it in multiple places on your computers and thumb drives, because you will want to go back to your last SF-86 to make sure your answers are consistent in the newest one. Section 26 is all financial stuff. What I'll tell you is you should sign up for credit, credit reporting, and check every 6 months to a year what's on your credit report, because that is one of the things the US government absolutely will do, is check your credit report. And there may very well be, as there often is for most of us, something on there you didn't even know about, maybe an error, or maybe just something that nobody's ever pursued you for, but is still on your credit report. I have actually been questioned about a $60 Verizon bill that was late and was an issue because I had sold a house and I wasn't responsible for the phone any longer, but the company didn't know and didn't shut the phone. Nobody shut the phone off. So there was still an outstanding bill. Section 28.7 deals with misuse, basically, of technology systems. Like, did you give a password to anybody else? Have you hacked into anybody's computers? Most of this hopefully would be a no, 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 no. But obviously those are all issues, understandably why. Section 28 is any other court proceedings that aren't listed elsewhere. So any civil lawsuits 10 years back, this is where your divorces would be captured. This is where your tenant landlord dispute would be captured. I've had people get into trouble because they didn't list things like that. It's not a problem. You just list it, you mitigate it. And by the way, the other thing is, if the cases are still ongoing and you're like, oh, I just want to get it over with before I list it. No, you list it and you can just provide mitigation as to what it's all about. And as I finish section 29, I used to just joke about, because it's association record. Generally, we don't find anyone guilty by way of association with people. And most of you are not going to be associated with terrorists, even though actually I have to say yes to this because of some former clients. But this, if you look at guideline A of the adjudicative guideline, if you know anybody who was at the Capitol on January 6th and you're a Stop the Steal person and you support that, actually that could be a problem. So you need to look at guideline A very closely and decide how you're going to answer some of these questions. Because this could be looking at, now this doesn't apply to you. You weren't there, I hope, on January 6th. But there are some aspects that could come about. But for the most part, this section is not going to be an issue. And then just to end, you can see here's a supplemental. You can just fill this part out if you have to add info or blank sheets. And then finally, you will fill out these waivers, which is to get your credit reports and also to talk to your doctors, not to get your medical records, but for the doctor just to answer these 3 questions here. And again, it's all about just if you're seeking proper treatment for whatever might impair your judgment, reliability, etc. That is a very quick 1-hour overview of the SF-86 that hopefully will help you get past and get your clearance. Traffic tickets. All right, so only if the fine is over $300, then it would be listed. So now, depending on the state, like if you get a ticket in Virginia for going over 80 miles an hour, apparently that's a misdemeanor traffic ticket in that jurisdiction. So it could, as I said, it depends. I can tell you all the traffic tickets, speeding tickets I've ever gotten. No, I don't have to list any of them and worry about it. If anyone ever has any questions or wants guidance on how to fill this out because you're doing so for a job, or you want to be prepped for your polygraph or your background interview, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'll always give you, some guidance, just if it's easy for me to do for free. But otherwise, I am always available. It doesn't take a lot of time generally to prep someone for these, so it won't cost you a lot of money. I also have another lawyer who's cheaper than I am to help you through the system. And it is obviously far better to do that as an investment in any event to make sure you get this right the first time than later on. Now, I will tell you, clearance wounds, if there's a problem, are generally healed by time. So a denial or a revocation doesn't mean you're done for the rest of your life. You don't have to worry about that. It's all, again, about mitigation. So don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any further questions with that. And I think with that, I'll turn it back over.